All right. Good morning, everyone. We will go ahead and get started. My name is Mark Hudson. I'm the Executive Director for the Ag Container Recycling Council, otherwise known as the ACRC, and I will be helping moderate a panel discussion this morning about the role of extended producer responsibility in agricultural plastics. And I am joined this morning by several esteemed panelists. We have Darla Arians, who is with Product Stewardship Institute. She is the Director of Policy and Programs. We have Bauer, Managing Director for RIGK, who is a stewardship program in Germany. And then Wesley Porter, Business Development Director for Berry Global. And so the format this morning, not totally dissimilar from the last session, but we will, each of us will share our own slides, a few comments, and then we're going to have sort of an interactive discussion amongst the group. And really, this is, I think, it's certainly not the first time that EPR has been discussed at this conference, but maybe the first time that we've gone as in depth about the topic. And there is a lot of complexity to this, probably too much to, well, definitely too much to cover in an hour and a half. But the goal of our session is really to help everybody in the room to kind of, at least in broad strokes, understand the principles of EPR, what's happening in the world of EPR today, particularly as it interfaces with ag plastics, understand some of the challenges and opportunities around that, and hopefully this will be the first discussion of many over the years to come as we continue to look at this as a potential path for dealing with some of the challenges that we've already discussed this morning. So with that, Darla Arians is arguably maybe the expert in the room, if you will, on this subject, and so Darla is going to lead off. She'll take a little bit longer than the rest of us to help frame up what EPR is about. Just a quick show of hands, how many in the room are familiar with extended producer responsibility? Okay, we got actually a majority, so that's good to see. But anyway, Darla will help set the stage, and then the rest of us will follow with our respective touch points, and then we'll get into some Q&A amongst us as a group, panel discussion, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions as well. So Darla, turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. So that's good to hear that a lot of you are familiar with EPR, and hopefully this presentation today will help you gain a little bit deeper understanding of what EPR is. I'll talk you through what it is, how it works, how ag plastics relates to EPR, and what the future of ag plastics stewardship could look like in the future. First, before I dive into EPR, I'll talk about a little bit about PSI, Product Stewardship Institute. We're a national nonprofit, and we historically have focused on consumer products, but in the last 3 to 5 years, that is expanding to also include commercial products in EPR. Our membership and our board of directors are comprised of state and local governments, and then our partners are comprised of industry, businesses, academia, and other nonprofits. We do a wide variety of work. We do policy, legislative tracking, we do technical research, we do data collection, we do GIS mapping. We help governments and industry develop and implement and improve EPR programs across a variety of different products. And we're really known for bringing people together. We're really popular for our facilitation process that we offer when developing new EPR programs. So what is EPR? It's really a paradigm shift. So it's a law that shifts the responsibility of a product or a package from the taxpayers and the governments over to the producers who manufacture those products, not only upstream to product design, but also downstream to the end-of-life management of those products. It also incentivizes more sustainable design. It provides convenience standards and equity and collection throughout the entire state, and perhaps most importantly, stable funding for infrastructure. So why is this change even needed? Well, you may have noticed that our current systems aren't really working. And so EPR offers a solution in that with the stable funding, with the convenient collection locations, with equitable access throughout the entire state. And it just shifts that responsibility over to create more sustainable products. So then we shift over to, you can see here on the diagram where that responsibility shifts from the households and the governments footing the bill for disposal of packaging and products that a lot of times they didn't really want. They wanted the product, but they didn't want all the packaging that came along with it, over to the producers, who then provide the funding for the collection and the infrastructure of the recycling services. They provide statewide education and outreach, and everyone in the state then receives not only the equitable access, but it's free for people in the state to recycle those materials for whatever that product is that the EPR law is focused on. The municipalities then receive reimbursements from the producers under their producer responsibility organization, or the producer responsibility organization can also contract directly with service providers to provide those services. And how it works, I'm just going to say this is a really condensed, generalized version of how EPR works. It does vary from product to product, and so just understand that as I'm talking you through that. But let's just say your state passes an EPR law, and we all take a moment to celebrate because that's super exciting. And then the producers form an independent nonprofit organization, that PRO or PRO. Sometimes it's called a stewardship organization. You'll hear it, but it's always that stewardship organization type name. Then the producers pay annual fees to that PRO based on the quantity and the type of the product or the package that they manufacture for that state. Then the PRO contracts with and pays those private haulers and or local governments, depending on the structure, to provide free and convenient recycling to everyone. There's one statewide list gets created. So I don't know if you've ever gone from town to town in your state and you're like, what can I recycle here? Nope, EPR solves that. There's one list statewide. There is an alternative collection list that can be allowed under some EPR laws for special collections, such as ag plastics. And then the state oversees the program and approves the PRO plan and works in consultation with an independent advisory board. So even though there's state oversight, this program's really run by the producers. It's developed by the producers. In the beginning, usually either before the law is passed or right after the law is passed, the very first thing that is done is to conduct a statewide needs assessment. And so they look at all the existing infrastructure and services that are in the state. They look at what the costs are to run those programs, and then they project out on what the cost would be to fill all the gaps that exist in the state. It's really industry-led, which is great. And then the state gets reimbursed for their administrative and oversight costs of the program by the producers or the PRO. So there are two different funding mechanisms under EPR. One is cost internalization, and one is a consumer fee. So cost internalization is where the producers have to internalize the cost of the end-of-life management of their products so that there is no consumer-facing fee on the product. With consumer-facing fees, the producers then pass that cost on to the retailers, who then pass it on to the consumer, usually through a visible fee. And you can see there's 4 types of consumer fee models out there for EPR right now, which are paint, mattresses, tires, and carpet. And that decision on whether or not to make it a consumer-facing fee and have consumers pay for it, or internalized fee, happens during the pre-bill writing. So during your stakeholder process where everyone's at the table talking through everything, that's where you really decide. I'd say the majority of EPR laws, as you can see, are cost internalization. A lot of times that has to do with politics and the idea that these fees can be interpreted as a tax for constituents. But on the consumer fee side, the logic and argument there is that instead of having all taxpayers pay for the program, you then have the consumers who are buying that specific product pay for the end-of-life disposal of the product they're purchasing. So something to think about with ag plastic stewardship. We work in over 24 product categories at PSI. All of these products shown here and more have product stewardship for their products, and including pesticides. Don't see ag plastics on there yet, but you never know. So let's shift over and talk about EPR in the United States. So in order to understand where we're at now, let's first look back. So back in 2000, when PSI was founded, we had 8 EPR laws in 7 states covering one product. Anyone want to guess what the one product is or was? Bags, nope. Mattresses, tires? Somebody's close with electronics. Yes, batteries, yeah. Now, look at what a beautiful sight that is. We have 146 laws over 21 product categories in 34 states. Pretty impressive, and it's really a testament to the fact that EPR is the best waste management policy solution. So now let's focus on ag plastics within packaging EPR. So we've got packaging EPR in 7 states now, with over a dozen other states who have introduced EPR or EPR-like bills this session that will likely be reintroduced next session. So first, I'll just say that the EPR model fits well for ag plastics. It really is applicable to any product category. And currently in packaging EPR, ag plastics like mulch, film, silage wrap, and pesticide containers are typically excluded. But nursery pots and the flex film for your soil and fertilizer bags, and the micronutrient jugs and bottles, the biostimulant and soil amendment bottles, and your squeeze tubes are all typically included in these 7 states for packaging EPR. The pallet wrap that goes around the products, not included in every state, but in some states it is included. And then Mark has a great slide actually that he's going to go through and really break down the differences between the 7 states. So I'm just going to let Mark speak to that. And I'm going to shift over and talk more about ag plastics in HHW EPR. So starting with Vermont, the U.S. has one HHW EPR law in existence that's in Vermont. Pesticide containers are not included in the program, but that's really because the state already has a program where it's through the registration requirement where they use those fees to fund collection and disposal for pesticide containers. The implication is that they're not managed under the Act, the HHW Act, but they can still be collected. Then, even though they're not included now, that law requires the state of Vermont to conduct a study. So they need to look at potential funding sources for the management of these products. They also need to look at the viability of an extended producer responsibility program for these products, and also other disposal options as part of an overall comprehensive strategy. So that study's due December 15th this year, so we'll be watching it closely and see what happens with that. What recommendations come out of it. Then in Illinois, they have a proposed HHW bill that does include household hazardous products, which includes the household pesticide products and containers. There is an exemption for industrial and agricultural and commercial bulk containers in that law. But under that system, as is typical for EPR, the producers fund the system for disposal and recycling and education and statewide collection of the covered HHW. And then similarly for California, the law is almost the same as Illinois' bill. it's not a law, it's a bill, sorry, excuse me. So those bills are very similar where there is that same industrial and agricultural exclusion, but it does include household hazardous materials, including pesticide containers. It also is a good complement, that bill, HHW bill in California is a complement to their existing pesticide recycling law. And that is for every registrant who produces agricultural or structural use pesticides has to register with the state. So it was established really for HDP containers, and it's the 55-gallon or less. There are some aspects of that program that are EPR-like, but also it's not a true EPR program. There's not really performance targets that are set. It's not funded entirely by all the producers in the state. And so it's a good move in the right direction, but it's not quite true EPR. And then in New Jersey, we have 2 pesticide bills that are currently being considered. So 1576 is the Farm Pesticide Collection and Disposal Program. It's a voluntary program run by the state. It's really an expansion of an existing sort of grassroots program that they have. It includes pesticide containers and unused pesticides, and it's commercial only. So it's really just growing the existing program into more of an officially state-run program. And then 3398 is New Jersey's packaging EPR program. Household pesticide containers are currently included in the bill as drafted, and there's no specific exemption for federally regulated products or packages, which most of the other 7 states have that exemption for federally regulated products. And also it proposes in that program that collection be free and convenient throughout the state. Okay, then there's some international models, but Jan is going to speak to the European model and Wesley's going to speak to the Canadian model, so I will let you two speak more in detail about those, but there are international models that we can look to for ag plastics. So what would the goal of ag plastic stewardship be? Well, it would be really to provide convenient collection locations throughout the entire state, ensure adequate and sustainable funding that doesn't go away, that you don't have to rely on grants or asking for money. It's to increase awareness, let people know this program exists, that education and outreach is funded by the producers under EPR, and to collect and use data to improve the program over time. Like the program isn't static. The way the law is written and the regs are written and the program plan is written doesn't stay the same. You collect the data, you see where you got it right and where you didn't, and you adjust the program over time based on real data that's collected as a requirement of the program. So what are some options for the future for ag plastics? Well, you could enhance the existing government-managed systems, and I believe there's 6 or 7 states, at least for the pesticide container recycling, that have the registration fee that funds the recycling. So you could enhance those systems so there's adequate, sustainable industry funding, as well as convenient collection. Or you could replace the existing government-managed programs that are partially industry funded with ag plastics EPR legislation and just make that switch. You could also include alternative collection options of ag plastics in future packaging and HHW EPR programs. You could launch pilot programs. This is really a great way to collect data and figure out what your costs are, to see how collection and processing might work. Expanding existing EPR laws through rulemaking. This has happened in at least 1 state so far that can cover specific agricultural packaging categories in the future. You could encourage more voluntary take-back programs like the ACRC, but perhaps with an expanded scope to include more ag plastics. And I included a few resources here. One is the PSI Pesticide Stewardship How-To Guide for Advancing Pesticide Stewardship, and the PSI Pesticide Stewardship Briefing Document. These were developed in in consultation through a national multi-stakeholder engagement process that we went through, where we worked with industry and others in the supply chain of pesticide container management, and with government members to survey and research the challenges that exist within pesticide container recycling. And this was in 2017, so it's a little dated, but still very applicable. And even though it's geared towards pesticide stewardship, it's really applicable to ag plastics recycling and stewardship, and really any product. The fundamental concepts are the same there. And that's all I've got. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Mark.
All right, next we're going to hear from Wesley Porter, again with Berry Global Amcor, and we'll turn it over to him. Wesley.
So I'll get this out of the way first. Why is the Berry Global guy presenting Amcor slides? We were acquired earlier this year, but for those of you that know the name Berry or are familiar with our agricultural films business, that's essentially the same. Amcor really didn't play in that business. So while the name changed for us in this room, it's very much the same. I do want to highlight Berry and Amcor both had a global presence, and I will tell you, when it comes to the topic of EPR, and we'll hear from Jan in a second, I learn a ton from my European colleagues. We have fully integrated recycling plants over there that use ag films as feedstocks, silage wrap, bale wrap, things like that. And they are doing things at a level that I'm only dreaming about now. We're still in the infant stage here, putting together what are the benefits, what are those impacts from EPR. But it really kind of gives me that shining light of what's possible and that roadmap of how to get there. Now the politics are quite different in Europe compared to here. One common question that always comes up in an EPR discussion, especially when they see all the different states and how they might be different from each other, oh, well then we just need federal legislation. And I don't want to get into politics here, but the chances of anything happening at the federal level are distant, right? So we need to deal with the states, we need to try and harmonize. I think it was mentioned earlier in the previous session that not one company can effectively solve this ag plastics problem on their own. That's why we're here together. What EPR does is it brings the entire value chain, the entire stakeholder chain together through those producer organizations to really collaborate and pool their resources, both financial and from an expertise and service standpoint. I want to give a little bit of background because my expertise really isn't in ag film EPR because it doesn't exist in the United States yet. We have been immersed, or as Darla mentioned, there are 7 states now that have packaging EPR, and by and large, that's what Amcor does as a company is as a packaging provider. So you can see some of the categories here, and it gets very complicated in terms of not just what's in scope for these laws, but who's obligated, who's responsible for paying the fee or for doing the reporting. And it varies across the map here. You see some industrial segments. You mentioned pallet wrap. That's excluded in a lot of cases. A lot of the packaging laws are focused on consumer packaging. And so while the collection and the application is different than ag film, we can kind of see where things are headed, right? That as governments and regulators decide to start to regulate ag, as Darla pointed out, that they're going to follow some similar kind of frameworks. I do want to point out here the ag films business that we do have. Primarily, we're participating here. I know from talking to Mark, he's mainly focused on containers. That's not a business that I'm familiar with or responsible for, but with some other exceptions. These are the areas that we're the most familiar with. There are recycling programs that exist through partners, through some NGOs, but by and large, these things aren't getting collected and recycled, and that's the opportunity. And I think the key distinction, what's the difference between what's in scope and what's out for existing EPR? To me, it's not that simple because it gets very complicated in the definitions and all the legal language. But is it packaging or not? In this case, we wouldn't call this packaging, so it's not really being seen through some of those existing EPR laws. So the map over here actually shows a little bit different view than what Darla showed. This is where the packaging EPR exists. And the reason I point this out is a lot of packaging is plastic, right? And so part of what's driving this transformation or this implementation of EPR in those particular states, the ones in green, are the need to address in general the packaging or plastic and even paper waste issue. Again, it won't be long before they turn their sights to other sources of plastic waste. We talk about burning in the field or sending ag plastics to landfill. There's a lot of volume there and will definitely catch the attention of regulators. When I look at it from a manufacturer's point of view, what's important to us are kind of these tenets here. We really want to make sure that the products that we put out into the world, I'm hopeful that you all do too, end up getting managed in the least environmental impact possible. Someone mentioned reuse, reduce, recycle before. That should be the mantra, right? And in the case of ag films, recycling may be where we're at. The idea that you make a sale and send your product out into the world and then stop thinking about what happened to it or the impact it had, that's an old way of thinking. We need to be thinking about the entire life cycle and how we all can participate in it. And what EPR programs do is pool the various stakeholders together to kind of get what we need done to get the infrastructure up to handle these sorts of materials. From a manufacturer, we want to use more recycled content in our products, not just in ag films, but in all those other products I showed you. And this is going to increase supply of those materials. The more recycling we do, the better infrastructure we have, the better quality and quantity of materials will be available. Someone mentioned advanced recycling. I know there's a panel, I think, later today maybe on that as well. One gap here is a lot of regulations don't recognize advanced recycling as true recycling. There is some legislation out there being talked about that will clarify the definition of recycling. What counts? What can you say is recycling? What can't you? Advanced recycling will play a key role, especially in ag plastics, where maybe, as was shown earlier, those may or may not be well suited for mechanical recycling applications. Materials like ag plastics, like for me, I deal in flexible packaging too, are recycled at an abysmal rate today. And we can't go from 0 to 100 overnight. We need to have kind of an on-ramp that, hey, we make progress and then we keep improving and then we hit this target at some point in the future. That's very important. It needs to apply to all materials kind of agnostically. Now, in the ag plastics world, we're talking about plastic, but there's different types of applications and different types of plastics that are used in those materials. And it's important that they're all considered and that we don't target a particular type almost as a punitive measure. It needs to be more collaborative. Trying to minimize administrative costs. That's why these pros are so important. They're stood up by and they're guided by the producers that participate and pay fees into this organization. So they should be able to spend the money where it's best served, where they get the most impact from. And lastly, harmonization. I mentioned people always ask about well, what about the federal law? Well, if that's not going to happen, what can we do in the near term to make sure that California and Oregon and Colorado and Washington, all these states kind of aim toward similar policies? If they're all different, and right now there are quite a bit of differences between these states, it will be a bear to handle for the industry as well as the effectiveness of those programs. So anyway, that's what's important. More of this will come out in the Q&A, and I think it's up for Jan now.
Yeah, before this pops up, first of all, thank you, Gene, for inviting me again to this conference and to setting it all up. And here we go. Yeah, today the topic is on EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. And this is what we are doing since 32 years. So RIGK, our company, was founded by this I think very famous companies, plastic producing companies and plastic converting companies. One of them is also Amcor. At the times when the RIGK was founded, the name was still Nordfolien and changed, I think, 3 or 4 times. But now it's Amcor, yeah. So when did we start? So we actually started in 1992. And why did we start? Because the first EPR law, I think, all over the world was implemented in Germany for packaging. And during this time, the industry said, okay, we don't want to give the management of our packaging, of our products away. We want to do it by our own. And so they founded us as a private company to do the job for them. So now we are also active in other countries in Europe. We have an agency in Spain. We have a daughter company in Romania. And we are not only managing, we are not only a management company anymore, we are also having a sorting facility for commercial films and super sacks. And we also have a platform that is distributing plastic recyclates called PlusChip. All in all, we are operating 8 EPR systems in Germany and one EPR system also for ag plastics in Switzerland. So we have actually 2 main business units. As I already said, we started with industrial packaging in 1992, and we have a system for non-hazardous industrial packaging, a system for hazardous packaging, meaning packaging with hazardous fillers. Both of these systems are bring systems, so that means the industrial end user is bringing the packaging to a disposal operator that is operating our collection point. And then we have also a pickup system where we directly collect empty packaging at the end user's place. Everything is financed by the packers and fillers. Yeah? And the basis is an EPR law for packaging in Germany in the moment. And next year, this will change with PPWR. This is the a European law for packaging waste regulation. So in Europe now we have a change from national laws to standardized European law. This will change in the next years, step by step. RIGK is also operating a certification company, so we certify the recyclability of packaging and the recycled content in plastic packaging. With the company called, the unit called PlusCert. But today the topic is not industry, the topic is agriculture. And there we are operating EPR systems for agricultural packaging, like for pesticide containers, as ACRC is doing, yeah? With our Pamira system, where we collect 3,600 tons of empty HDPE cans every year. We have another small system for seed dressing packaging called Bauer system, and a system also for super sacs used in agriculture for fertilizers. Yeah. And we also collect obsolete agricultural pesticides from the farmers. So that means we also collect these chemicals directly, so the products which are not used anymore. And apart from that, we collect in 2 systems, one in Switzerland and one in Germany, agricultural films. In Germany this year, we are close to connecting around 40,000 tons of egg films and egg plastics. And in Switzerland, which is a much more smaller market, we are collecting around 2,000 tons every year. So when it comes to this non-packaging egg plastics, we have in Europe in the moment 9 systems. 8 of them are voluntary, and only 1 of them is based on EPR law. Yeah, that means in Europe we have an EPR law, as I already said, for packaging, but not an EPR law all over Europe until now for non-packaging plastics like films, net wrap, and twines, yeah, for example. What do all these systems have in common? The systems are specialized on these products. Yeah, so that means they have specialized collection modalities. Yeah, they operate nationwide, and they include as many products as possible. So that means normally a system installed does not only collect film fractions, they also collect other fractions like trip tapes, hail nets, bale wrap, bale nets, everything. Yeah. The systems are all based on shared governance and responsibility between the actors of the value chain. So that means the producers, distributors, farmers, but of course also the recycling industry. Costs are normally internalized in the product price. Darla already talked about this topic. And systems are always adapted to local needs because agriculture is different in all the different European countries. So the systems are always standardized but adapted to local needs. And all EPR systems for agricultural plastics apply also, we can say, these basic principles at least. Why do we need these systems, or why they are so successful? First of all, because the farmer needs a sustainable end-of-life solution for all their agricultural plastics. Moreover, they are able to deliver transparency and traceability based on data and documentation of all the material flows. They reduce the costs due to economies of scale, and they lead to greater availability of high-quality secondary raw materials, as Wesley already said. Yeah, and all in all, of course, the systematic approach leads to better results in collection and recycling rates. When we started with our Erde system in Germany 11 years ago, we collected around 1,000 tons, and as I already said, now we are at 40,000 tons. So there's a lot of improvement if you have such a systematic funded approach. Yeah, and last but not least, of course, you have a lot of environmental benefits like CO2 saving, you save resources. So this is, I would say, the main effect you also have. This is so far from my side. I'm looking forward to the discussion. But now it's Mark's turn.
All right, well, my slides are being queued up. Darla just reminded me of something that I'll go ahead and mention here. Many of you that have been here in past conferences will recall that we've often had another organization called Clean Farms. Barry Friesen, who's the general manager or executive director for Clean Farms, has spoken a number of times. And they would be a similar program to what Jan just referred to, similar also to the ACRC, but with a broader scope, similar to RIGK. So just wanted to mention that for those of you maybe that have operations on both sides of the North American border, that Clean Farms exists and does many of the things that we're talking about this morning. So again, I lead the Ag Container Recycling Council, or the ACRC, and I'll refer to us as the ACRC from this point forward. Not everybody knows what that means, but just to give you a little bit of background, first of all, I like to refer to us as best as I know, probably the closest thing to a voluntary EPR program that there is in the U.S. I'm not aware of any other programs that have the history and the structure that we have. And so we're proud of that, but it's also important to understand that we are a voluntary program as opposed to EPR, true EPR, what Darla described in terms of the definitions of EPR being truly a regulated approach. But the ACRC is a ag chemicals industry stewardship program. It was initiated about 33 years ago, ironically, about the same time as RIGK. We're the oldest such stewardship program in the U.S. We are a not-for-profit. We are, again, a trade association, which means we operate for the industry good, for the ag chemicals industry good. A couple of different key areas of focus. We are involved in research. In fact, we were originally founded as the Ag Container Research Council. And so that research is around identifying and approving appropriate end uses for the plastic, and that's been a part of our mission since day one. And then the second side of what we do is about the collection and recycling program. We have worked hand in hand with EPA and with other standards organizations through the years. In fact, Darla mentioned the California recycling law, and she, on her slide, you may have seen the ANSI-ASABI standard. We actually founded that standard about 25 or 30 years ago as a standard for what we do with ag chemical containers, but we've worked hand in hand with EPA all these years. Up at the top, you sort of see the key pillars of what we're about: research. We ultimately support this nationwide recycling program through our members. It's fully funded by our members. And then we do a lot of work in the area of promotions, education, and training. Things like this conference. We go to a lot of trade shows and conferences, farmer-facing events. We do an enormous amount of training of the grower community around proper recycling of containers, including things like triple rinsing or pressure rinsing, proper rinsing of containers. It's also important to recognize that we are, I think there's a misperception that we are just about pesticides. We're not. We're the whole universe of ag chemicals. We were founded for pesticides, but today include fertilizers, animal health products, micronutrients, adjuvants, and surfactants, the whole shooting works. This is just a snapshot of our members to give you a sense for the breadth of our membership, which includes both regular members who are the chemical manufacturers and also our affiliate members who are the packaging manufacturers. Those are the folks that make the jugs, the drums, the caps, the labels, etc. But through the history of our program, we have collected, since our last conference last summer, have eclipsed the 250 million pounds milestone, which is quite an accomplishment for us. This is sort of the structure for the boots on the ground. So we have a network of independent contractors that do the work for us. The ACRC consists of a lean staff of 3 of us. We run the program essentially virtually, but we have this network of contractors that actually do the collection. They actually would be the ones that go to, whether it's to a farm, to a golf course, to a nursery, a greenhouse, an ag retailer, to a county landfill, etc., to all these collection sites, do the collection. They ultimately are the ones that process the plastic and then sell the plastic to approved end users that the ACRC has approved. This is the general process, some of which I just stated, but ultimately, since day one, again, because we started with pesticides, EPA mandated years ago that a pesticide container has to be triple rinsed to be presented for recycling. And so we have extended that to all ag chemical containers, regardless of the product family. So all the containers that we collect have to be triple rinsed or pressure rinsed. That's done by the grower or by the professional applicator before they're presented for recycling. And those have to then be inspected by our contractors. So the grower would would rinse their containers, they'll store them until our contractors arrive for collection. The contractors then arrive and they inspect each one. They either grind them on site or compact them and then take them back to their facilities, and then the plastic ultimately gets sold for recycling purposes. Again, a part of what we do is researching and approving specific end uses. My colleague Lee O'Neill is here with us this morning. Lee is our recycling end use manager, and that's the whole area that she's responsible for is all the technical aspects of identifying end uses, and then underneath each of those end uses, we approve specific end users. That goes through an audit and assessment to make sure that all of our membership would feel comfortable with where the plastic is going. Before I get into the EPR aspects, just want to touch briefly on the economics. So if you look at this, it all sort of centers around our contractors, but ultimately our members fund the whole program, at least in terms of providing a subsidy to our contractors. The second source of revenue for the contractor is the revenue that they get from selling the plastic. So the contractors are providing a free service to the grower community. They collect the containers and then they sell the processed plastic to end users that make things like, I've listed there, ag drain pipe, nursery pots, landscaping, edging, etc. But they get the revenue from that, but then they also get the subsidy from the ACRC, and of course the subsidy is actually far and away the majority of the funding that they receive, which is one of the key aspects to point out in this whole EPR conversation. Without the ACRC, none of this would be happening because the revenue from the plastic is not enough to sustain them. All right, so let's talk about the interface with EPR, and ultimately you can see the universe of containers that we're talking about, and again, this program is strictly ag containers. We've talked about the, Wesley already showed this map which shows the various states where packaging EPR has already passed. The blue states are where it has passed. The orange states is where we expect it's likely to pass in the near future, or there are bills that have already been introduced and are pending. And we expect within the next several years that we'll probably see a few more of these blue states that will go from orange to blue. One of the things that I want to highlight is just the complexity that's involved in the laws that have already been passed. So this, I don't expect you to be able to digest all of this, but it's really sort of an eye chart to understand that if you look at each of the states that have already passed, there are lots of different aspects that matter in terms of what the law requires, and in every state they're all different. And so for producers, it creates a lot of challenges in terms of navigating this. My members, particularly the brand owners, that's the chemical manufacturers, I have 38 member companies that are some of the largest chemical companies in the world, and they are the ones that are trying to navigate how these laws impact them. And you can see from this chart that there's not very many lines on here that are the same. And some of the things that come into play are where there's various types of exemptions, whether the state involves professional uses or only residential uses, what the pro structure is that Darla referred to earlier, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the key takeaway here. I want to just touch on this slide. The interface with packaging EPR, ultimately, we've talked about there's 7 states that have enacted packaging EPR. FIFRA is the pesticide universe, and so there are exemptions that have been established for FIFRA products, and that right now seems to be a precedent that is true in most states, but not all. ACRC recognition seems to vary. We have one state, Oregon, that has actually given us an ACRC exemption, and we are going to be advocating for ACRC exemptions in other states. There is certainly a comprehensive packaging impact. The EPR laws affect all packaging, not just the containers that we collect, but obviously things like bags, et cetera. We are pursuing a proactive exemption strategy, again, ultimately looking to try to get an ACRC exemption because we collect the whole universe of ag chemicals. However, as Darla also alluded to, we would probably be looking to try to get an expanded scope in our future so that we could really our members would ultimately be responsible for not just containers, but bags and other things as well. There is a significant challenge with free riders. Our program is not perfect. Because we are a voluntary program, as a result, we don't have all the industry at our table. We think we represent, from a volume standpoint, probably about 75% of the marketplace that are members of our program, which isn't bad, but it certainly is, it's a sore spot for our members because they know that some of their peers in the marketplace are getting a free lunch. And then I've already touched on the state-by-state complexity. I think that's the key, is none of this is simple. So as we talk about this, I think that's one of the things that each one of you will probably recognize is this is not a simple subject. And when you really dive into the details of it, there's a lot of challenges because of that complexity. All right, so all of our slides will be available to you, and you'll be able to reference those in the future, but we're going to now go to just some questions that we've teed up, and we've had a little bit of discussion around this. Let me this works. I'm going to grab this mic. All right, so one of the things that I want to make sure that folks recognize is we've talked a little bit this morning about the concept that there's packaging EPR, which is really today the closest thing to touching ag plastics is packaging EPR. In the US, there is not, we'll call it ag plastics EPR. And so just understanding that is important. On our website, we have a page called Recycling Other Ag Plastics, and it has a matrix of all the different types of ag plastics, and I'm sure it's not comprehensive. I'm going to list those, and then just briefly I'd like us to talk about which ones fall under packaging and which ones do not. So our list includes jugs, drums, IBCs, asset totes, drip tape, polytube or polypipe, mulch film, greenhouse film. I saw on Ted's chart earlier about 3 or 4 other varieties of ag film, silage wrap, super sacks, plastic pallets, plastic bags, which includes things like seed, fertilizer, etc., nursery pots, nursery trays, twine, plastic netting, etc. So that's sort of the universe of plastics that we're all talking about in this conference. If you think about all of those, I guess the question for this group is which ones are not included under packaging EPR, and I don't think any of us felt fully equipped to answer that, but clearly the ones that are covered by packaging EPR are the things that are clearly a package. So things like jugs, drums, and bags, those are pretty easy. But then when you start getting into things like wraps, it gets a little bit more muddy. And but then there's other things that are clearly not covered under packaging EPR. And so those are the ones that, in the absence of EPR, will continue to be sort of stranded. They're the folks. They're the ones that we're struggling to deal with. So twine, netting, the silage wrap, on and on. Those are all the things that that are very challenging. In terms of films, maybe Wes, you can comment on this, or Darla. Are there films outside of bags that do fall into packaging EPR?
Not that I'm aware of. There's 2 factors there. One, you're talking about the material and how it's used. So I'll step back into the container world, like a pesticide container. Well, it's a package, so you would think it'd be in packaging EPR, but there are exemptions made for who uses it. If it's, I forget who was showing, Darla, maybe showing home use versus commercial or agricultural use. State by state, it varies. You know, some of those may be excluded just for that reason. But when it comes to like the products I showed, the mulch film, greenhouse film, silage, those are not covered at all. And it's unclear if, Well, to me, it's very clear that regulators are starting with what their consumers see, because it's easier to get political will behind those things. But they're all still plastic, right? They all have the potential to be recycled, and that's why we see that it's headed that direction. I'm curious if I can ask a question from Jan. Did you see that sort of evolution as well in Europe, that it started with the household goods and then expanded?
Yeah, we exactly are seeing that in the moment. So everything started with household packaging, and in some member states in the EU also with CNI packaging. Yeah, that means when we started, there was also a kind of EPR for example, super sacks, for vessels, for jugs, and things like that, with an exemption mostly for pesticide containers, because they are too hazardous. They wouldn't like to have them in the waste stream of other systems. They were exempted. And what we are seeing now, a huge discussion on the definition of packaging, which is now solved for the PPWR. But in Europe, the definition is like this: if the plastic is an integral part of the product, then it's not packaging. Yeah? For example, when you have the silage wrap, you have a wrap around the bale, and without this wrap, you cannot produce the silage. So silage wrap is an integral part of the product, so it's not a packaging. Mm-hmm. Whereas a commercial wrap, in our case, in Europe, is a packaging. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Because it has the packaging function. Interesting.
Yeah. Are you confused yet?
Yeah, I was going to say, I know for all of us that's as clear as mud, right? So, so move on to a next question, which we sort of were dancing around there. I'll tee this up to Darla. For packaging EPR states that are focused primarily on residential, so meaning not professional uses or industrial uses, does that mean that basically none of these ag plastic uses are covered by those EPR laws if they're strictly focused on residential?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we look at is, are the containers and packages normally handled under an MSW or municipal solid waste system? So can it flow through the collection, curbside collection? Can it go to a MRV? Can it be sold to an end market through that process? And I think that's where we start, because that infrastructure is mostly in place. There's an allowance for alternative collection programs for other types of plastics, but what we see pretty consistently are the FIFRA exemptions. We also see the exemptions for ag and industrial and some commercial applications. There are about half of the states that have that include commercial and industrial. So just to make it, add to the confusion, it's not consistent from state to state, but there are a few states that allow for it.
Mark, to draw a parallel to ag is healthcare. There's also a lot of exemptions for healthcare products, and it's for similar reasons, if you think broadly enough: hazardous waste, biohazardous waste in some cases, but also healthcare is seen as sort of an untouchable, like, hey, this is contributing to the quality of life of the people in this country. Same thing with anything with the food supply. It's easier to pick at, say, packaging. Oh, we can do better with packaging or do something different. But in those areas, I don't want to say they're sacred, but they're a little bit more difficult politically to push against, I guess.
All right, I want to ask Jan and Wesley to just confirm for us. I think this was touched on briefly in some of your comments, but again, thinking about ag plastics EPR as opposed to packaging EPR, are there countries where there is in fact ag plastics EPR? Jan, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think where we have in the moment, I'm aware of 2 countries where we have regulated EPR for ag plastics, which are not packaging. So this is first of all Ireland in Europe. So they have the Irish Farm Act, which is especially designed for ag plastics, already over 20 years. Yeah. They have a very good system in operation that has very high collection rates, so works very well. The other systems, as I already said, the other 8 systems in Europe on ag plastics, on ag non-packaging plastics, are on a voluntary basis. And we have clean farms now with some provinces. As I remember, I think Ontario, for example, they have also regulated EPR for non-packaging ag plastics. This is the two I'm aware of in the moment.
And do I recall that there is an active movement right now to look at that more broadly in Europe? Is that true?
This is true. So in Europe, the Commission has finished the PPWR law, so the law on packaging waste, and they are now looking into other products. And this they do with a law that is called the Circular Economy Act. And they are doing now an analysis on mandatory EPR for ag plastics, non-packaging ag plastics.
For all of the EU?
For all the EU,
okay.
Yeah. And normally if they do such an analysis on EPR, the mandatory EPR is coming. So this
Right.
we saw on
one follows the other, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just to expand on the clean farms, just out of curiosity, who in the room is familiar with the Clean Farms program in Canada? Okay. So in North America, that's our only and our shining example for a collection of films, but it starts quite organically, right? They introduce these pilot programs within specific provinces or regions and demonstrate the capability. We can, I think for films, they started with silage film. They recently expanded into bale wrap and some other things, and they're just sort of organically growing that. The question then is, what do the regulators do with that? Does it turn into a voluntary program, or does the regulator see, okay, that's the model, now I want to formalize it in regulation? And that's mostly what's happened in Canada. And I'm curious, if that could eventually happen with the work the ACRC is doing. You're getting exemptions today to say, we're already taking care of it, but could it also be sort of the roadmap for broader, regulation?
Yeah, and so we had a little bit of this conversation last night during the reception, and my answer to that is ultimately one of two things is going to have to happen. Either it's going to become regulated through EPR laws, and or producers, brand owners of the other types of ag plastics are going to have to step forward or approach the ACRC and say, we want to do this. And so that's, if you look at Clean Farms membership, my membership is all chemical companies that put their products in containers, or the packaging people that make those containers. If you look at Clean Farms membership, it's all of that, but it's also now the producers of all these other different types of ag plastics. And so, that's what it would take before I think.
You asked me a very difficult question, which is, well, do you think the rest of your industry, my competition, would be on board with, say, expanding a program at ACRC or just a voluntary program preempting any sort of regulation? And it's difficult because unlike the chemical industry that you started, you were founded on, we don't have a lot of commonality. I rarely talk to my colleagues or my competition. I think we need to encourage that sort of open discussion on what's best for the industry and how do we approach it together, because like I said earlier, no one of us can do, if each one of us puts our own system out there, it's going to be fragmented and clunky. Having, a more efficient program would benefit us all.
Needless to say, I think that's the beauty of Gene teeing this topic up for this conference and having us, start this conversation. So let's move on to sort of next question. I had a question about the pros and cons of EPR, and then I had another question about incentives and barriers. In the interest of time, I'm going to try to combine those, but I want to ask the panelists, and you can answer the question as pros or cons, or you can answer it as what are some of the incentives and what are some of the barriers. But can you comment about that in terms of pros and cons or incentives and barriers to EPR specifically as we think about ag plastics. So Darla, I'll start with you.
Sure. All right. So pros are pretty easy. It's the convenience standard and equitable equitable access to the recycling services. One of the biggest pros is the stable funding source that doesn't ever go away to build your infrastructure and provide those services and the education. And then the performance standards that are included, tracking the data, tracking the success of the program, and also the incentives that are behind the program to encourage producers to create more sustainable products and packaging. What we didn't really talk much about yet today, another big pro, is that EPR is really the foundation for the circular economy. You're encouraging PCR use in the products, you're giving preference to the producers in the program to buy back the materials that they produced in the first place. So it really creates that circular chain to support a more circular economy. There's so many more pros, but for sake of time, I think one of the cons is that, especially for ag plastics being so new, it takes a long time to develop a model bill that everyone can agree with and move forward on. And we've seen firsthand from packaging EPR, there wasn't a coalition, there wasn't a national multi-stakeholder process involved. Industry really wanted to move forward with the bill that worked for them, and they did. But they didn't talk to the governments, they didn't talk to the NGOs, the ENGOs, and so now each state has come forward with these very different bills that have very different legislative goals attached to them, and it's created a fragmented system. Whereas if you look at how we've rolled out other products, such as paint, where we facilitated a national multi-stakeholder process, where we got government, we got industry, we got everyone from the supply chain, we got academia, we got nonprofits, all at the table with our differing opinions, and we worked it out. And we signed an agreement on a bill model that we could all live with, and now we have paint EPR laws that are consistent from state to state, which makes implementation so much easier. But that is an absolutely necessary process that takes time that we have to work through. And one last challenge I'll add is you're regulated by the state. And in some states, like Colorado, that's not a big deal. Other states, I won't mention, it's a little bit harder. So there is that challenge in some states too.
Great, thanks, Darla. Jan, any comment on some of the pros and cons from your perspective?
Yeah, I think Darla already mentioned all the pros, I think so, yeah. So for me, especially for the agricultural sector, I think it's very important that the farmer get a sustainable end-of-life solution. And this is how we actually came to our voluntary EPR systems, because the farmer asked for a solution at our collection points when we were collecting pesticide containers. Yeah? So I think this is very important, also the demand side from the clients. When it comes to the barriers, I would say, to my experience, the highest barrier is really to reach a consensus between all the actors in the value chain. That means everybody has to be on board to make such a system a success. Yeah? If it's voluntary or if it's under law. Because if it's under law, we also see sometimes that there's no execution in the end. No? And then you have the problem of the free riders, which could harm such a system and could also influence the competition between the actors. And this is a big barrier that you have to solve on a voluntary, but also on a regulatory approach.
Great, thank you. Wes?
Just because I live it every day, I'm going to skip over the pros and go right to the cons. I'm not normally a negative person, but the con, and it's sort of what Darla referred to, it's an artifact of how these laws came together. They're very complex and very difficult to navigate, and at least in the packaging world where it's been implemented, there are hundreds, if not thousands of companies, well, there are definitely thousands of companies that are involved that are somehow implicated in this. And not all of them have legal departments and regulatory and compliance departments to kind of sift through all this mess. I will tell you, so when we were very global, the first packaging EPR was in Oregon, and that reporting came due earlier this year. And there were no fewer than 4 different scenarios where our products were implicated. But then the question became, who's obligated to first report and then pay? And in one of those scenarios, we were as a company. In another one of those scenarios, it would have been our customer. In another one of those scenarios, it might have been a distributor to a customer. And in another one of those scenarios, I'm still unclear on who it was, but it gets very messy. I'm hopeful because I think the ag plastics industry is a little bit smaller than the packaging, or less fragmented than the packaging industry, that there is an opportunity if we call it pre-EPR, or essentially what a voluntary program is, that if we come together and kind of build that model initially and set it up on a platter for the regulators, then a lot of these issues that I'm dealing with now that are causing me stress are better managed, right? Like the other big one right now is laws get passed, regulations get drafted but not finalized, and then you're in the reporting and fee paying. In some cases, we're paying fees on materials where we don't fully know the full scope of how much it's going to cost yet. And as a business, that's very hard to manage. Like, how do you budget for that? How do you explain that to your customers? As Jan said, these things take a long time. We need to get ahead of this. This is really, to me, the call for action in this room is not that we all need to go ask our politicians and representatives to pass an EPR law, but we need to collectively come together and figure out what does it look like for us and what other stakeholders are missing from this equation, and start to come to terms with that so that when it does become a regulation, we're prepared.
Great, thanks, Wes. I'm going to just make a comment here that I think has come out in particularly Darla's comments, but in terms of some of the barriers or challenges that might help you to understand why, if you think about like paint, which has been very successful, it's a single industry and sort of a single product category. That industry came together and they were able to come up with an approach that has worked. In the case of packaging, you could argue, well, packaging is one category. Well, yeah, but there's lots of different types of packaging, so many different variations in packaging, and even material types within packaging. And it goes across all industries. And so when you try to bring all those stakeholders together, there's nobody that's going to be aligned. They all have conflicting interests or challenges, and so packaging, I think, is more challenging. And I think that, if I think about the ACRC program, the reason we've been successful is it's sort of one product category. It's ag chemicals. Yes, it's all different types of ag chemicals, and it's one type of packaging. And so we have been able to reach agreement or consensus on approach, and it's worked for 33 years. If you think about ag plastics, it's a lot more like packaging, right? There's lots of different types of ag plastics, lots of different stakeholders, varying needs and requirements, and so I think that ag plastics, and this is not to be pessimistic, just to say that it's a watch out, it is more like packaging than it is like paint or like my voluntary program. And so I think as we look at this, you just got to recognize that there are a lot of different requirements that go into it. All right, I want to ask, if I can get my computer to come back. Darla, maybe you can comment on a couple of items before we go to audience questions. One is, and you touched on this, I think, the idea of potential for federal legislation and the likelihood of that. And then maybe you can segue from that into what would be some possible next steps for pursuing, ag plastics EPR.
All right, so I'm the optimist in the group when it comes to federal EPR legislation. PSI is currently supporting the US EPA in a federal framework for battery EPR. And it's been a year-long national multi-stakeholder engagement process. We've got the framework drafted now. It's being reviewed by the stakeholders. We're very close to finalizing that. And as Jan mentioned, when there's a federal agency that's studying this closely and putting together a framework, it's more likely that something's going to happen with that when they put that much time and effort into it. So I'm optimistic about the battery EPR framework. And then we have Congressman Tonko from New York who has drafted a federal EPR framework for packaging. And so that is currently being circulated amongst various EPR experts and stakeholders amongst the states right now. I think under the current administration, it's not going to move. But I am optimistic for the future. But like I said, nothing happens fast with EPR and nothing happens fast in the government, so it's not going to be much different here. Oh, and then what was the other?
Yeah, if you can
Yeah.
comment on, as we are collectively in this room thinking about the possibility of ag plastics EPR, what would be possible next steps in that journey?
I think it really goes back to the coalition building. You've really got to get everyone together from across the entire value chain, along with state and local governments, because they're usually, local governments at least, are the ones footing the bill for waste management a lot of the times, not necessarily for ag plastics, but they'll be involved in the waste management process. So get all the stakeholders together, have a dialogue, talk about what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Talk through what are the best practices in EPR. There's 16 elements that are best practices to include in an EPR law, and go through those and then fine tune them and see what works best for your industry and for your materials. Talk about what covered products should be included, what's in, what's out, who's going to receive these services, what are the covered entities. What are the convenience standards? Do you want to base it on population density? Do you want to make it like a mile radius? What are the performance standards involved? Are you setting recycling rates and PCR content requirements in the law, or do you want to leave that to rulemaking? That's a decision you have to make along the way. There are a lot of different factors that you need to talk through and decide on before you even think about drafting a bill. So that's your first next step, is to form a coalition and have a national multi-stakeholder dialogue.
Great, thank you, Darla. All right, Gene, I think we'll open it up to audience questions. We've got about 11 minutes by my phone, so.
Question right here.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. They were excellent. I've got a question for Darla and Wesley. Have you seen any economic analysis reports done on the cost of food prices as a result of EPR? Because I haven't. If you have, I asked that question because in low margin sectors like agriculture, the costs are bound to be passed on to the consumer, like the Ontario program, which failed. The other question I have is for Jan. Can you talk a little about if there are any subsidies attached to the European EPR programs, either for packaging or plastics? Thank you.
I can kick us off, if that's okay, Wesley. So I have seen various studies on the cost impacts of EPR, and I can tell you that it is fractions of a cent per product or per package, at least under packaging EPR. And we just held a session at our own PSI Product Stewardship Forum in June on this topic with experts from the supply chain talking about it, and they described that the increase in cost that is experienced is then passed along through the supply chain and not necessarily it doesn't necessarily land on the consumer. But also, really, what you need to think about is the consumers, all of you in this room, you're already paying for it. You're already paying for it. But then that goes away. So the money you're saving far outweighs the fractions of a penny of a cost that would be increased through an EPR. Also, that is under the model where there's no consumer-facing fee. There's also the other model for paint and mattresses, et cetera, where it is a consumer-facing fee. So that's a conversation that you could have in your dialogue of, do we want to have the person who's buying the material pay the disposal fee with the purchase price? Or do we want to do the cost internalization? And you can weigh that out and determine which way is best for you.
I'll just say I think what Darla said is correct for packaging, in that packaging of products, the package is typically a small percentage of the total cost of goods. And so these EPR fees that are attached to packaging kind of get buried in that small percentage there. But there are some examples in packaging EPR, say like garbage bags, trash bags, where the product itself is also assessed a fee. In Oregon, those fees are end up being almost double the cost of goods. And much like the ag business, the packaging business doesn't have the margin to absorb that. So in those cases, it will affect cost of goods. So I think it's sort of like, how are these costs getting diluted out into the total cost of goods? If I'm talking to a packaging procurement person at a customer, they care a lot about their cost of packaging. But when you look at their total costs, you're right, it's not going to hit the consumer's wallet as much. I'm not really sure what that looks like for the ag films. What portion of food costs are related to ag film costs, and how much of it will move the needle? In those cases where we're only concerned about the packaging, a lot of those costs are getting absorbed and just becoming part of the way we do business.
Jan, you want to touch on the second question? I'm not sure if I can repeat it, but did you get it?
Yeah, I caught it. I guess you asked for subsidies from the European Union. So there are subsidies on the circular economy in general. On EPR, there are no European subsidies because it's a law. But what we see is that national governments, they support the setup of voluntary systems. For example, for egg plastics, we saw it in France. There was a big subsidy they got, Alibaloa, the pro for egg plastics. So in some national states, yes. From the EU in general, if there is a law in place, no.
Thank you, Jan. Other questions?
Quick, let me ask Darla. You talk about the fragmentation from state to state with EPR laws. Are you seeing anything at the local level? We just wrapped up the waste conversion conference, and I learned that LA County is working on their own countywide EPR packaging law, which I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, we have seen that. Alameda County, California was actually the first county in the nation to move forward with a local level EPR ordinance, and they got sued over it, from Big Pharma. It was regarding pharmaceuticals. They actually won the case, and so we're starting to see various jurisdictions. In Colorado, where I live, Boulder County is running a pilot now for their own vape EPR collection program that PSI is supporting them in. And so we're seeing a little bit of that, not a lot.
I guess I'll probably be the final question. So, I've heard about EPR at so many different conferences, and what I really have not heard yet, and I'm thinking maybe I'm just missing it, is where is there any accountability or the cost of plastics going back to the virgin resin producers? If you don't make the plastic, you don't have to worry about making it into a package.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like that would be simpler
right
way to measure.
again, I don't want to dip too far into the political world, but I think one of the reasons why I'm pessimistic about like federal EPR is the fossil fuel industry has a very strong lobby that is politically divided, right? But the broader question there is, I just lost my train of thought. I shouldn't have gone politics.
I think you already answered my question.
No,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
and I can speak too in terms of how the language is crafted in some states is around after the material is processed, and then the pro has to offer it at market value to the producers first before they go out to market it anywhere else. And so it doesn't really fix the price or set a requirement around the price, but at least it follows that market value, and it's providing more supply into the system because it's, increasing the amount of material that's being fed into the recycling systems.
Yeah, I remember now. So one thing that there is a lever within EPR to address the cost of virgin plastic versus, say, recycled plastic, and that's eco-modulation, which has not yet been implemented yet. It's in the laws, but we haven't seen the impact of it. But the idea is that if I'm paying like 50 cents a pound for linear low density polyethylene products, maybe I get a discount on that if they're made with PCR, right? And so currently today we see the cost of PCR is higher than the cost of virgin plastics. Two things are happening here with EPR. One, the entire recycling infrastructure will get subsidized by this program, hopefully bringing down the cost of PCR. And then the other is the cost, the PCR can come further down in terms of the cost, in the package or in the film or product through that eco-modulation. So there are incentives that are given within these EPR models to promote that, but that's even more fragmented and disparate in terms of how those are seen state to state. Does that help?
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Quick question on advanced recycling as it relates to this whole EPR process. I'm curious about the feedback loop and the systems that are in place. How are the producers getting the information that's helping inform them, say on their packaging would be an example. If you look at advanced recycling, at the end of the day, we produce a pyrolysis oil, and that oil gets then made into certain things. But certain materials like drip tape contain fluorine, and fluorine is actually a poison for refineries to their catalysts. And so that feedback needs to get into the EPR feedback loop. And I'm just curious what the mechanisms are for that type of feedback, especially coming as advanced recycling is starting to move forward.
I haven't seen it become part of EPR yet, but I think that feedback loop happens on the market. So today there are specifications for different bales of recycled materials, on mechanical recycled. They need to meet these certain criteria, these standards. And what I've seen as a buyer of advanced recycled resin is that one supplier of ours might have one spec, someone else might have a different spec. There needs to become, similar to there are for bales, there needs to become a standard specification for what's an acceptable feedstock to deliver to a pyrolysis operator versus some other chemical process. And if you get there, then it could be included into EPR, but even better, it establishes that market value. Like if the recycler, when I say recycler, the collector, the MRF, whoever, the sortation company understands where their value's at, they're taking in all this material. All right, this is going to mechanical recycling. This meets the specification to sell to you, right? And it should develop that way, but I haven't seen it in regulation yet.
I definitely have seen it. Did you want to go?
Well, I was just going to say that a starting point in your question is the premise of advanced recycling being viewed as recycling in an EPR state. And so I think that's starting point number one, is you've got the question of whether advanced recycling is even considered recycling in some of these states. And that's a question that is pretty polarizing. People have strong views on that one way or the other, as you know. And then I think part of your question also ties into the ecomodulation discussion. I don't think it's gotten that sophisticated yet, but I suspect that over time, questions like what you just posed or that specific example could become part of ecomodulation in a state where advanced recycling is allowed or acknowledged as recycling. But if a chemical component of a certain type of plastic is a problem downstream in an advanced recycling, then it ought to be charged a higher fee. Because that's the whole premise of ecomodulation, is that things that are easily recyclable get charged a lesser fee, things that are difficult to recycle are charged a higher fee. That's what ecomodulation is.
And I'll also add, each of the state EPR laws has their own definition of recycling, which generally defaults to mechanical recycling and generally does not include any combustion process. It does not include any fuel production or waste to energy, generally. However, if the pro, so the communication is happening from the producers through the pro, but also with the oversight agency and also with the advisory board, which is multi-stakeholder group of everyone from the supply chain. So that communication is happening. So if the pro decides they want to use any type of recycling other than mechanical, they then are required to do an environmental impact assessment to look at any potential negative impacts that that would have, and then bring that back to that communication chain to make a determination on whether that's an allowable use. Yeah.
Gene, I think we've stolen 3 minutes of their lunch, so we better turn it over to you.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. Great session. You guys did exactly what I wanted that session to do. So if we can, we're going to break for lunch. I'm going to have